So I would say we give him, but I chose the topic barriers.
And he's very proud of his graphics.
It is pretty impressive.
You notice that's pretty cool, huh? I had to follow his footsteps, and I would say Emily's, but last week was your footsteps too, in terms of the material, but she did a great job presenting it, so I had a high standard to uphold. So we are looking at John chapter 5, the first 18 verses. Let me read them. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to get me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am going, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, take up your mat, and walk." And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Now that day was the Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath, and it is not lawful for you to take up your bed." But he answered them, "The man who healed me, that man said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" They asked him, "Who is the man who said to you, 'Take up your bed and walk'?" Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, as there was a crowd in the place. Afterward Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. And this was why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is working until now, and I am working." This was why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. And I chose the ESV here because the Greek term that we just translated here as invalid really just means more generally illness, sickness, but it's clear from the rest of this story the guy can't walk. And the reading of invalid has special memory for me. Let's see how many of you can remember more than 5 years ago I preached on this passage in this church. Now, here's what may help you remember. Robin Green was so happy because the title of the sermon was, "Help, I need somebody." And he said, "Does that mean we get to play the Beatles?" I said, "Ask them." I said, "It's fine with me." And they did at the close of the service. We didn't all. And it was great. They rocked and it was cool. But one of the first things I said here, that for that particular message, and we're approaching it a little differently today, was I had a student, 9th grade, in class. They get incarnation and reincarnation confused. I mean, they get things mixed up. And the fellow was reading this passage, and he said there was a man lying there who was invalid. And people kind of laughed, even other 9th graders saw it. And yet, isn't that so much what this is about? He was viewed as invalid. So, that gave me a starting off point more than 5 years ago. All right. I'm a big believer, and everybody else has done this up to this point in these series of lessons. Where are we in John's Gospel? We don't just land on a passage and deal with it. It's part of a bigger story. I never cease to be amazed at the literary structure that these fishermen, whatever their occupations were, seem to have a really good sense of how to put a story together. Let's start at the end of the gospel, because John is the one of the four gospel writers, the only one who really says, if you want to know why I'm writing this, I'm going to tell you. It's nice if he'd done that up front, but that's okay. He does it at the end, chapter 20. And in case you didn't get it, it comes at the end of chapter 21 also, which may have been added. Some think it was added later by some of his followers, but it does end in the same way, like this. Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. I am telling you these stories so that you will believe that Jesus is the Messiah and your Savior. Any questions, John says? All right. So it should not be surprising that the first half of John's Gospel has been given the title by some scholars, the Book of Signs, because we get in that these signs, miracles that Jesus does, and I want to show you where our story today fits into that. We all know the first miracle, water into wine at the wedding of Cana. And you will also, may come to your mind, several of these are in no other gospel. Only John tells us about them, which is a whole nother class to teach. Did John know about the other gospels and just didn't think they had the right stuff? Did John not know about them? Did John have a different agenda? Who knows? All right, water into wine, that's not in. Last week you saw there was a real nice parallels between the three synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, how the wording was different, how maybe a term had been added. Really can't do that this week, because the next sign we have is the healing of a royal official's son. And today's lesson, healing a disabled man by the Pool of Bethesda, is not in any other gospel. You do have in all of the gospels, which is wonderful, the feeding of the 5,000, the walking on water. You have blind people healed, blind men healed in all the gospels. It may not be exactly the same story. And then the raising of Lazarus, which is only in John's gospel. So that makes up the book of signs, the signs that John wants to give us to show who Jesus is. And ours that we're going to talk about today is one of those. Also going on in John's gospel is what's called the festival cycle. Some of these miracles and other discourses by Jesus take place over time during major Jewish festivals. What we have today, it says it was a festival. It doesn't designate which one it was, but more importantly for today's passage, it is on the Sabbath. The next time we get the Passover. And often the connection to a festival is made with something that Jesus is saying or doing that looks like it may be taking on what the Jews had practiced with their festivals. He was saying is now me. And so we see with work today, what does he say? The Father and I are working. You guys kind of have it wrong about work. My Father and I have it right. At the Passover, that's the same time, same episode as the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus says, I am the bread of life. The next one will be Tabernacles, where Jesus says, I am living water. And then finally, Hanukkah, celebrating the rededication of the temple after the Maccabean revolt against Antiochus, in which, in that episode, he says, I and the Father are one. So we have this festival cycle. John's putting these major events of Jewish festivals. He is bringing forth these signs. The second half of the book, in case you were wondering, people that call the first part the book of signs call the second part the book of glory, which is Jesus on the way to his glorification on the cross. And interesting, you'll remember the last of the signs was the raising of Lazarus. And like today, and Emily and I talked about this last week, after some of these life-saving miracles, we get the note that they wanted to kill him. A very odd response to saving somebody's life, turning their world around in a positive way, is let's kill this guy. And that's one of the questions I have for you today. How come? That's weird. All right, so we know where we are in John's Gospel. We're in the early part of the book of signs. We're at the first episode in the festival cycle. Where are we in Jerusalem? How many of you have actually been to the Pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem? Yay! I thought that was really cool. What's next door is, to me, also very cool. Not from Jesus' time, but it's a Crusader church. The Church of St. Anne, named for Mary's mother. It is acoustically perfect. Every group that goes in there sings, and they will only let one group at a time. You sing your song, right, and then you get to go. They still doing that? And it's one of the few Crusader-era churches to survive. The Muslims didn't really like them, but that one got turned into a Muslim seminary. There's still an Arabic inscription over the door as you go in, and it's a lovely place. And it's right next door to the Pool of Bethesda. So we are told in John's account, and this is what these kinds of things tell you. John knew what he was talking about. John knew this city. John knew these people. John knew their customs. This is by the sheep gate at the Pool of Bethesda, which means house of mercy. You may, in other translations, and NRSV-UE, which we use in this church, calls it the Pool of Bethesda, which means house of the olive, which you can certainly see house of mercy. House of olive, many believe, is probably more like it, more original. And it is adjacent, as I said, to the Crusader Church of St. Anne. You'll also find Bethsaida. You'll find all kinds of variations on the name of this pool. But I think most of us have heard it as Bethesda, not Bethsatha, so I stuck with that. There's a map. Where was there a Pool of Bethesda? And this was quite a discussion among early historical critical scholars who sought to debunk much of what we get in our Bible, particularly the New Testament. And they said, well, there's no such place. We've never found it. This pool is a wonderful fiction set up by John to tell this story about a miracle that couldn't possibly be true anyway. Well, guess what? They found it. they found it. And there you have a map. At the very top is the Pool of Bethesda, and then you see the sheep gate. So that is, and it's just north of the temple, and the Temple Mount. So, from my handy-dandy Bible History Daily, put out by the Biblical Archaeology Society, highly recommended that you get a weekly email from them. You read this kind of stuff. When Jesus heals the paralytic in the Gospel of John, the Bethesda pool is described as having 5 porticos, a puzzling feature suggesting an unusual 5-sided pool. Right? We're all used to rectangular pools, which most scholars dismissed as an unhistorical literary creation. Yet, when this site was excavated in the late 19th century, it revealed a rectangular pool with 2 small basins separated by a wall. There was, in a sense, a second pool, smaller. Thus, a 5-sided pool, and each side had a portico. So, along the 2 longer sides, that was still the same side, but you had another side at the top of the second pool. So they said, I didn't do it, I'm innocent. They said, this is it. What were all these people doing there? And this may take you back to your King James Version days, where you get an explanation in the text of what they were doing there. But the earliest and best Greek manuscripts do not answer the question of what was everybody doing there. But the now omitted verses 3b, the second half of verse 3 and 4, provided an explanation. So you may remember this. It's in the footnotes for most modern translations. For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. Then whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was made well of whatever disease he had. I took that from the New King James. There was a reverence for water in the culture. Of course, water was scarce, a valuable resource, and every pool, apparently, in the pagan way of thinking, had its own spirit. This one did too. It was probably fed by a natural spring, which occasionally would lead to bubbling. So that's kind of the backstory on the pool. And I love this from one of my books that I consulted. Once a site was identified as a sanctuary of healing, the tradition was impossible to stop. Excavations at the site show that after the New Testament era, the pools continued to be used as an Asclepion, named after Asclepius, the Greek god of healing. So that tradition continued. Here comes the fun part. This class in particular is designed to draw you in, think about some things, answer some questions. I can teach a little more by how, depends on what you answer. But as with all texts, all biblical texts, they do teach us something about God, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, and they do teach us things about humanity, us as people. And we can then take that and individualize it to our own lives. So that's what these questions are designed to get us to think about. Why did Jesus go to the Pool of Bethesda in the first place? And he seems to be alone. This is not Jesus and the disciples. Why do we think he went there? He was heading to the temple and hadn't gotten there yet, or? Yes?
Did he knew there would be lots of people there that he could minister to?
That seems to be the most logical and often thought of answer. I can't think of a better one. Obviously, this place had a reputation. There were a lot of people there. And if Jesus was looking to do some good, what better place?
Target rich environment.
Oh, yeah, right. Oh, there's lots of fish. Yeah. He's going to go be a fisher of men, and there were a lot of them. Okay, I think that's right. It tells us that Jesus, being a man of compassion, sought out a group of people who needed help.
Chris?
Yeah.
I may have missed, where in his ministry is, what time period? He's supposed to have a 3-year ministry.
Yes.
Whereabouts in that ministry is at the end?
We're early, because John's got him coming into, unlike the other Gospels, coming into Jerusalem for these feasts like 3 different times.
Okay.
And I think this is one of the first. So we're early. All right, so we think he's on the lookout for people who are in distress. That's what he does. Why did he single out this particular man for healing? We just said there are lots of people there in trouble. How come this dude? Yeah.
He'd been there 28 years.
38.
38.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jesus probably had come by this pool before. And
Yeah, but not for 38 years.
no, but
Okay. You make the point that is the best I have figured out. Jesus, and did you catch in the text? It said he knew he had been there. for a long time. And I don't think that was because he cast by, there's that guy again. He knew. He was God. He knew. And the guy had been there 38 years. That is distressing. Maybe others had been there a long time. So we're almost there. Why single this man out? And I think, yeah, Charlie.
He also kept trying to get to the pool, and no one would help him. And so he never made it in time to be the first in the pool.
So not only did Jesus know that he'd been trying this for a long time, he could see that nobody else was helping him. And that's certainly one way I think of Jesus, is the one who would help the people that nobody else helps. So looking at those things, I think we've got the best picture we can have is Jesus was, in a sense, looking for the toughest case, the guy that needed him the most.
So does that mean Jesus picks and chooses who he wants to heal?
Certainly, can't come to any other conclusion reading the Gospels. And that's the point he made in Luke chapter 4 in his first sermon, where they wanted to throw him off the cliff, when he used Kevin's lesson on Naaman to say, God has always done this, and the people he picks and chooses aren't necessarily his chosen people. Naaman the Syrian was healed. And there were lots of Jews suffering from leprosy. There were lots of Jews dying of famine, but he chose to raise the son of a Gentile woman. And so I think we can come to no other conclusion, at least when we're talking about physical healing. He picked one. Yeah.
Last week when Emily was speaking, she was talking about a woman who had so much faith in Jesus that all she needed to do was touch his robe.
Yes.
Here Jesus is helping someone whose faith is in some spirit.
Oh man, you're on the next question. You're on the next because, no, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Because the next question we're going to have is questions and observations about the invalid. And you're absolutely right.
Sorry.
And but that's a great, that's what you're supposed to do, be thinking ahead even. But she's absolutely right. There's no, Jesus, heal me if you can, or no. In fact, just to say, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I'm cool. What do we got all day?
Hey, Chris. So I think about personality types, personality inventories. And it's hard to think that somebody that was of that age laid there and that nobody saw, a blue type personality saw him and thought, well, I'm gonna take this person just theoretically under my wing, and I'm going to make sure that he gets to the water, or that people help him, whatever. And so my question is he was an invalid, but do you think people thought that there was something unclean about him, and the reason he was an invalid was because of sin, and that's why nobody wanted to help him?
Boy, y'all are just roaring ahead. And we do get some evidence that Jesus thinks it might be because of his sin, which is not a universal theological proposition at all. I mean, that's what the book of Job is about. And then the healing of the blind man. Who sinned, you or your parents? Well, none of them. But we do get some indication in the passage when Jesus says, don't go sinning anymore, or it'll get worse. So maybe in this guy's case, but I don't see that he was unclean. Not being able to walk doesn't do that for you. But you are raising, again, we're going to look at some questions about Jesus. We're going to look at some questions about the invalid. And we're going to look at some questions about the rest of us. And you really hit on the big one. In this sermon that I preached many years ago here, it was focused on that. And three things that you got to have three things, right? Three things that I mentioned. Why was nobody helping him? One was clearly fear of missing out. Everybody else wanted to get there because what was in it for them? And we can't worry about this guy. I got to get there. So that would be one. Another, just too busy. Just too busy thinking about themselves, thinking about what they needed to do, what they needed to accomplish, and just didn't pay attention. And then finally, not so much fear of becoming unclean, but just fear of getting your hands dirty. do I really want to haul this invalid, who probably wasn't looking too good anyway, besides being unable to walk? Do I really need to lift him up on my shoulders and carry him? There's a great quote from the brothers Karamazov. I won't remember it exactly, but the bottom line is, I've never found it hard to love mankind in general. It's when I'm asked to love a specific man that it's problematic. So yeah, I'm all for love, peace, and all that, but no, don't ask me to pick up this guy in his rags and carry him to the pool. All right, so we think it's probably because if Jesus is there in the first place to help people who need help, a guy that can't help himself, who's been there for 38 years, is as good a candidate as we're going to find. Now, what kind of a stupid question is, do you want to be healed? I mean, that's what Jesus asked the guy, right? That's the first thing he says. Do you want to be healed? And I thought of putting a slide up of Homer Simpson going, duh. So, okay, it's not a stupid question. I love Jesus. He doesn't ask stupid questions. But it sounds like a stupid question, is it? I mean, you're expecting a guy, darn right, which isn't what he says. Well, but yeah, why? Why this question?
I've heard a very different take on this.
Okay.
That this man was not truly an invalid, that he was perfectly happy to be a beggar. And so, you know, that's a good question then for him. Do you want to be healed? And afterward he says, go and heal and sin no more. And anyway.
Okay, I think I don't think we have to buy that he was a fake invalid to come up to use your explanation, which is a very possible one, and a very good one. He may just have gotten used to this. This may have been the best way for him to survive, and no, he wasn't all that. He was willing. Either had given up after all these years, or had found it to his advantage that, well, gee, if I can't ever walk anyway, let me get some alms out of this. So I think that's a very real possibility. I can't say I've ever heard that he was faking it. But it does lead to that very sensible conclusion. This is not a weird question for that very reason. Do you really want to be healed? One of our people told the story of the lady, one of the people who is standing on the corner of Bee Cave and 360 as you get off. Somebody said, well, why don't you look pretty healthy? Why don't you get a job? This is my job, which is a shame, but it was an honest answer. And that may well be the case, that the man, for whatever reason, had just lost the will to do anything, had settled into this way of life. We don't know. But the point is, Jesus did know, knew more about it than we do, and so it was actually a very good question. Does Jesus correct the man's superstitious belief? What little does Jesus say to the man? Does he say, hey, look, first let me explain, this is not a magic pool? Does he do that? No. Well, what does he say to him? What's the totality of his part of the dialogue? Do you want to be healed? And then what? Get up and walk. Okay, there's no lecture. There's no, and by the way, what have you learned from this experience? But we want that, don't we? I mean, and back to some of the questions that have come up so far. Does Jesus pick and choose? What's the story with this guy? He doesn't seem to express faith. That ought to tell us a good bit about what Jesus is up to and what he cares about. And here, what he's caring about is a poor guy that nobody else cares about. Does Jesus suggest, and we've sort of answered this, a connection between sin and sickness, at least in the case of this man.
Yes.
And yes, I mean, whether he's faking the paralyzation, or has done other things as the rest of us have done, he does say, if we bought back, okay, I bought back without two. Okay. He does say to the man, he found him in the temple and said, "See, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you." Jesus would tell any of us, sin no more, but it is possible that in this case, Jesus was saying, I hope this healing makes you well in more ways than one. How does Jesus respond to the accusation that he was violating the Sabbath regulations?
He said his father.
Yeah, that's he turns it from a debate, or what could be a debate, about there were, what, I think 31 articles on just on what it means to work on the Sabbath. He doesn't go down that path. He says you kind of messed it up. You don't really understand what this was meant. He doesn't even say in this passage the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. What he says is, I am working in my Father's work. We're always working. What is that intended to tell us about Jesus and the Father? Which they clearly pick up on. That we're one. We're the same. Whoa, blasphemy, bad stuff here. What is it intending to tell us about people's understanding of work? They don't have the right understanding. Yeah, carrying a mat after you haven't been able to walk for 38 years isn't work. It's a celebration.
It would be like asking a doctor
And,
not to be a doctor on the Sabbath.
okay, healing in particular, that's right. No, healing on the Sabbath is okay. God is in it for us, and if we can end suffering, whether it's a Saturday, a Sunday, or a Wednesday, it really doesn't matter. That is work. That is working. And I think Jesus is saying, oh, maybe y'all ought to be working too. That we're going to talk about in a minute.
So there's a contemporary story about that. Joe Lieberman did the eulogy for John McCain. Said John McCain was a very impatient person, but he did, whenever he traveled with Joe, was very respectful of, Joe's constraints, being Jewish.
That's faith, yeah.
And but one thing that tried John's patience was that in the elevator in Israel, it was on the Sabbath programmed to stop at every floor.
Oh no!
So you wouldn't have to work to push the button.
Oh my! Yeah, well, since it's so old, it's not going to be taken politically one way or the other. That was my dream ticket. I wish the two of them had run together. But anyway, and we were just in Hanoi, in the Hanoi Hilton, and saw McCain's flight suit that they have on display. And Lieberman appreciated McCain, McCain appreciated Lieberman. All right, so Jesus doesn't get into a theological dialogue about what it means to work on the Sabbath. He's just going to tell them, the Father and I are one, and we're both doing what God always wants to do. All right, what about our guy? What observations do we make about him? What questions do we have about him? What does the mention of 38 years tell us? Now, some might say, well, it's meant to remind us of the 40 years wandering in the wilderness minus 2. You'd have to subtract the 2 to get there. But more basic than that, what's it tell us? This guy's been a long time. It has been a really long time.
Yes.
Who initiates the encounter? Does the man ask Jesus for healing? Does he even answer Jesus' question?
No.
Okay, Jesus initiates, do you want to be healed? And the guy doesn't go, duh, what do you think? Or sure, you'll find me somebody that can help. No, he gives him an explanation about why he can't get into the pool. He doesn't even give him a direct answer. So Charlene's on a good track here, that the kind of stuff we want to see to earn a healing isn't happening. I think there's a lesson in that too. All right, there is a title to this lesson today, but you can't just zero in on it and go for it. You got to look at the whole picture. What are the barriers to this man's healing? Are they only physical? Obviously, this is the starting point. Assuming he really is disabled, he can't do it. That's one. Getting back to the interpretation that maybe he's faking it, there's obviously an emotional and moral barrier that he's built. There may be an emotional barrier anyway, which is just, I've been here I've been here a long time and this is the best I'm going to do. But he was trying. I mean, he says he was trying. What other barriers? Yes, Charlene.
Kind of depends on what you think is healing. The thing that really bothers me about this whole story is at the very end of it, I'm not sure he believes in Jesus.
We're going to get to that one too. I don't think he does either. No, please. We can talk. I don't have to go in order. Blessed are the flexible, for they will not be bent out of shape. So, I think you're absolutely right. There is absolutely no indication. Whoa, the Messiah. Yeah, I'm going to tell everybody about it. No, don't tell everybody yet. That's what you usually get, right?
Well, and Jesus told the woman last week, don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
He didn't say that to this guy. This guy
probably wasn't going to tell anybody.
Who Jesus was. He finds out who Jesus was, and then he goes and tells. So it's like, this is like the opposite of last week.
Right. In fact, looking at it cynically, the only reason he tells anybody is to throw Jesus under the bus and get himself out of harm's way.
Well, I'm sure this is part of God's larger story, but it doesn't fit with the other miracles.
That's why you're invited into God's larger story.
So one of the barriers is he's in the wrong place.
The what?
He's in the wrong place. He believes that the supernatural is going to heal,
Right.
rather than being with Jesus, which tells us that even if you're in the wrong place, Jesus can find you.
I think that is a very valuable lesson to be learned here, that he will take care of people at his will, who haven't figured it out, and who might not even when he's done. Most of them who do understand, at least some have some sense of who he is, don't tell people, because you go around telling people I'm the Messiah, I'm done for, way before my time has come. Let's not get them riled up about that yet. But no, you didn't have to tell this guy, don't tell anybody, because it's unlikely you will. Yeah.
What we don't know is why this man is an invalid.
True.
And maybe he's an invalid because he did something he was not supposed to be doing in the first place, and people knew that.
Possible. He jumped in the pool and didn't realize it was shallow, and those things happen. Yeah, no. Or
They knew he had done something as an adult that he was not supposed to do. And people knew that he had that kind of life, and they were not willing to do anything for him.
That is an explanation for human behavior.
We don't know.
Yeah, the fear of, well, I think primarily they wanted to get in the pool.
Yes, I do think that.
But it is possible that this guy isn't worthy to get in the pool.
Exactly.
And again, Jesus is saying that's not my measure of who I heal. But what other barriers? His own, both spiritual timidity, perhaps, or spiritual mistake that this is some magic pool, his possible, likely, I think, physical infirmity. What else? What's he trying to get into? A pool, not always easy for anybody. Physical barriers. That's why we have, in part, the Americans with Disabilities Act, so that people don't face physical barriers. My wife and I, Charlotte and I, love to travel. Invariably, on every trip we go on, these guys haven't heard of the Vietnamese Disability Act or the Cambodian Disability Act at Angkor Wat. I mean, holy cow, you're going way up this deal, and there may or may not be a railing. And we forget about that. As I get older, I don't forget about that, and I'm very appreciative. The Parthenon in Athens, not really good on access. You all can think of places that you've been outside of this country where the barrier is just this physical layout of what you're trying to do. And that, I think, was also an issue here. Because the pool is, you gotta have to get over something to get in. You can't just roll in, or the pool wouldn't be holding the water. So that's a possibility. I think some of you have touched on what I think is the biggest barrier. What do you think is the biggest barrier?
He gave up.
That's a possibility, his emotional state.
Maybe being ill is his comfort zone, and being well would be such a big change that he can't fathom it.
I think those are all very good possibilities. Those are all things that probably led Jesus to say, do you really want to be healed? I think the biggest barrier is the people around you. I mean, you can take everything else and fix it, at least fix his immediate need, if somebody had just helped him into the doggone pool. Now, would he have been healed? Probably not. But, you know, the story really emphasizes it's not just that he's been this way for 38 years, but for all that time, probably nobody's helped him.
And doubting.
What?
And doubting in
Yeah.
Jesus.
So we have a lot of barriers, physical ones, spiritual ones, physical ones that aren't our bodies but are structural, barriers of belief, barriers set up by other people, either by doing something that keeps you from being healed or doesn't help you to get healed. Two sides of the same coin. And Charlene, you get to answer this one. Does the man demonstrate faith?
Well, I was kind of testing myself a little bit because he did go to the temple. Jesus did find him
Afterwards.
in the temple.
Yeah.
Afterwards, but he was very much a Pharisee. I didn't hear the word thank you.
You won't hear thank you, but we kind of jump over this because it's sort of matter of fact. Does the man demonstrate faith? He doesn't say you're the
He did
Messiah.
stand up.
Exactly. He was told to do two things. Get up and hoof it with your mat. And he did. He did do those things. He could have, if he were really in the emotional and spiritual soup, forget it, man, I know I can't get up. Who are you kidding? I'm not going to make a fool of myself and fall down and have the mat land on top of me and everybody go, ah. No, he did exactly what Jesus told him to do. Get up and walk. I said, what did it take for the man to receive the healing power of Jesus? Doing what Jesus said. Right? That's a lesson for all of us.
But what seems strange to me, he did not know who this person was that healed him.
Absolutely not. That's made clear. So he could have said, not only am I going to fall down and look like an idiot, But people are gonna say, who's this guy that you fell for his stuff? That's possible too, yeah, Bill.
Well, and two thoughts. One is, this is supposed to be early in Jesus' ministry. Nobody knows who Jesus is.
Certainly
He's just
not
getting
to
started.
the extent.
He's just one of a lot of itinerant miracle workers.
And there were. He's not the only guy that actually is going around healing people.
But number two, the thing that strikes me is this guy had faith. He hung around this pool for 38, well, probably you got to get him to be a teenager for 20 years.
Yeah, I think the 38 years also is.
So he had faith that he could be miraculously healed.
But
This just wasn't the scenario that he'd been taught about how it happens, but hey, it happened.
well, no, exactly right. I mean, his faith was in a mysterious angel. And back to the 38 years, we, and particularly many, I'll speak for myself, but looking around, 38 years, that may be half our lifetime. 38 years exceeded the life expectation in Jerusalem in the first century. So one thing that is telling us is this guy probably been there longer than a lot of people had been alive. So it was probably not, in his 30s, he had an accident playing rugby or something, or jumping in the pool. I mean, he probably was very young when this, whatever it was, came upon him. But yes, he does do what Jesus said, and he does get healed. Is there, and that we've anticipated this as well, you're so good, is there a spiritual healing in this encounter with Jesus? How is he to respond to the grace shown to him by Jesus?
Picking up that.
In the first instance, doing what Jesus says. And then after the interaction in the temple, how do we say thank you? He didn't say thank you, but his future life may have been a whole life of saying thank you, which is to demonstrate his gratitude by continuing to obey, by sinning no more. That should be all of our response to the grace that we are shown. And I'm keeping an eye on the clock. I'm thinking, man, I'm used to kind of talking for 45 or 50 minutes, but we were only 10:15 and we just got to the question. Oh my gosh, we're going to end early. No, because you guys are great with the questions. Was it unlawful for the man to carry his bed on the Sabbath? They accused him of that. That's how the whole controversy starts. They accused him of breaking the law, but it actually wasn't. You're not supposed to work was your occupation, your profession. And one commentator I read, I love the British, this would not have, as a Scotsman, this would not have been a problem under the Sabbath regulations unless the guy was a furniture mover. His job was to carry mattresses around, yeah, okay. But no, it actually wasn't, for the man, a violation. Now, questions about the Jews. And we have to remember, in John's gospel, we're talking about scribes, Pharisees, not the Jewish race. What causes this beautiful miracle story to turn into a murder plot? What? Because that's how it is. They were seeking to kill him. You'd think they'd say, wow, this is really cool. There's this guy who's been able to walk for 38 years. Whoa, who is this man who did this? We need to talk to him. They need to talk to him because they want to kill him. What happened?
He equates himself to God.
Yeah, we get to the very heart of the gospel story. My Father is working, I am working. He'll say later in John's gospel, I and the Father are one. And that really sets them off. And you see the same thing in Mark's gospel early on, where the paralytic is lowered through the roof and healed. Your sins are forgiven. Whoa, you can't, we don't care if you heal him physically and he can get up and walk. What we're worried about is you're forgiving his sins. You can't do that. Does anyone seem to care that the man has been healed? Obvious question. But you have to ask it. No. Nobody in this story is celebrating that this guy doesn't have to wait another 38 years. I mean, that's, to me, absolutely amazing. Neither the Jewish leadership, there's no report of the people around responding. Oh, did you see that? Is the conflict in this story ultimately about the law? And Keith has answered that. No. It starts with, well, you're not supposed to be doing this on the Sabbath, Jesus. You're not supposed to be healing on the Sabbath. But that quickly turns into, yes, I am, because that's what my Father and I care about, and He and I are always at work. Okay. Wow, 10:45, awesome. I end with one of the gems I dug out while preparing from Gary Berg, who is a New Testament scholar. Jesus selects a man who is a particularly difficult case. We've talked about that. He does not reach out to those who are spiritually on the margin. Maybe they believe, maybe just a cultural belief, but socially safe. We know those people. They're socially safe, spiritually kind of lukewarm. Instead, he reaches out to someone whose suffering and isolation are beyond measure. That seems to be the only thing that matters in this story. What implications does this have for where the church goes today? We started by saying, why did Jesus go to this pool? Why did he go to this man? Our New Testament scholar says because his infirmity, his suffering was indescribable. That's the answer to those questions. What does that say about where the church goes today? I can probably leave that as a thought question. But any comments would be welcome. Any comments about anything? Yes.
What drove this man to do the same process, the same number of attempts trying to get in the pool for 38 years? At some point, wouldn't you say, hey, this isn't working?
Yes. Well, that's what we teach our fellows. Phil, you know this in prison, which is you've been in and out of here 10 times. What's plan B? Because plan A doesn't seem to work. There are a couple of possibilities. One is he really believed that one day, if he could ever get in, I mean, his problem wasn't that the supernatural healing didn't work. It's that he couldn't get to it. So, I suppose he had some hope in human nature that one day somebody will help me get in. But the prior suggestion that maybe he just found it a good way to at least get some alms. If you got to stand on a street corner waiting for the cars to come by, this is better. We got all these people coming to this pool. So I think both of those are possibilities. But I think, once he really believed he could be healed, if somebody let him in. Other thoughts, questions? Next week we get to talk about blind Bartimaeus. Okay, got it? All right, way to go, team.
Thank you so much.